Hey guys, Andrew here, and just wanted to post this week's video. Sorry I haven't posted something in a while. This illustration took me a little bit longer than I had planned, and it's also a little bit different than how I normally work and approach illustrations. So because of all that, it kind of took a little bit longer to assemble footage and just record audio and all that fun stuff. But anyway, I'd like to show you guys my process video for my Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess piece. I've created this illustration for Hero Complex Gallery's 30th anniversary Zelda show that opens this Friday, February 26th. So when I post this, it'll probably be the 26th, 2016. If you're in LA, check it out. It's a really cool gallery and they have some amazing work. But yeah, so for the video, what you guys are going to see, this is part one of, I think, what's going to be a 3-part video, because if I put this all together, it was going to be close to 2 hours long. But in part one, you guys are going to see me start off with my initial concept. There's a video where I even talk about what kind of my goal for the piece and what I want it to look like, and kind of just things I wanted to do with it when I first started. And for the most part, you're going to see a lot of that stuff carry through all the way through the sketching phase, or the thumbnails, the sketches, finding reference photos, and doing the final line drawing, and then finally doing the color. In this video, you guys are going to mostly get to see the thumbnail phase and the sketching phase. Part 2 of the video, you guys are going to mostly see me finish up the sketch and get it to a final line drawing. One of the ways this illustration is different for me is it's a lot more intricate on line work, and I really tried to show you guys a lot more texture and things like that through line work, whereas normally I kind of rely on flat colors and my style is usually a little bit looser, so it took a little bit more time for me to kind of slow down and make sure I really nailed those intricate details. So if you guys aren't familiar with it, Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess came out in 2006, and in the game you switch between playing in what they call the light world and the shadow world, and as you can guess, the color palettes and things like that are very distinct. The shadow world is obviously dark and uses like lighter colors more as like highlights and pops and things like that, and in the normal world that Link and all the other characters kind of live in and have known all their lives, it's very light and utopian. So I wanted to kind of play off that idea of like the balance between light and dark, and kind of have the color palette really show that. So my initial plan, like you'll hear later on in the video, is I want the dark tones to start in one side and it mostly be dark tones on one side of the illustration, and then I want it to gradually change into lighter tones until it is mostly light tones plus maybe some darker tones as highlights or pops. So it's kind of inverted almost. But yeah, so I hope you enjoy this video. Let me know if there's anything I can do to improve these videos in the future. I sped this one up to be about 20 times its actual speed. So if you guys would like me to slow it down, let me know and I'll try to do that on future videos. Just know that there probably won't be as much narration to them, or as much of me talking over it and explaining what I'm doing, just because if I slowed it down, I would be talking for a good 2 or 3 hours for each part of the video. So in total, you'd have like 9 hours of me just talking about what I'm doing on screen. And for the most part, a lot of it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a lot of just me drawing and using my references, things like that. So if there's anything specific, you can ask me in the comments or tell me to maybe highlight that in future videos, whatever. But yeah, I hope you like this, hope you enjoy it, and hope you learn something ideally. So thanks so much for watching, and enjoy the video. Okay, so just a little bit of a preview on this Zelda illustration I started. At this point I've done a couple thumbnails. I figured out kind of what I want to go with. I'm going to try and blend in a mix of pattern work and also a little bit of illustration. So it's a little bit different for me in terms of how I'm approaching this and how I'm thinking about the overall concept. I did just to kind of refamiliarize myself with Zelda Twilight Princess, because that's what I'm basing this off of. It was one of my favorite Zelda games, and so I went through and watched like a 5-hour walkthrough video of the entire game and did screenshots so I could get some of the really cool graphic language and pattern work that they kind of include in there. Especially when it comes to the shadow world, there's a lot of really cool patterns and just like designs on like the backgrounds and on the characters themselves. So I'm going to try and bring a lot of that into this illustration. I'm not sure if I'm going to try and make it repeat, since like that's something I know how to do and that might make it a little bit unique, but I don't think it works with the idea I have in mind. Because what I want to do is, let me grab the sketch. So hopefully you guys can see this. If not, I'll put have it show up on screen when I edit this. But so right now it's kind of really rough. This thumbnail is I have kind of like a circular shape over here with the Triforce, circular shape here with the Triforce, and a circular shape over here with the Triforce. The idea I have in mind is going to be this one. There's going to be swirling around this Triforce is going to be kind of like a warped illustration of Link, and then the wolf Link, and then maybe some other things that kind of are associated to Link throughout the game. Over here we're going to have Zant, and then Ganondorf, and then maybe Ganon when he's in his like creature form. And then we're going to have some of those weird little like shadow creatures with the like flat heads up here. And then you can see some of the pattern work there and there. And then over here I'm going to try and put in Zelda, and then maybe have Midna's altar form when she like at the very end of the game. And then I think here in the middle underneath the Link swirl thing, I'm going to have Midna's little mask, and I might have it with all the pieces attached to it. And then these three Triforces, there's going to be wisps of things connecting them all. And I also want to try and bring in the spirit creatures, so like the bird, the like elk deer thing, the monkey, the snake. I think that's it. Yeah, the monkey, snake, deer, and the owl. Yeah, so I'm going to try and tie all those in. Obviously I can't go too crazy with the characters just because it's going to get really, really, really busy. If I were to bring in like the Zoras and or Zorans, or excuse me if I get this wrong, the Gorons. It's been a while since I played this game, but yeah, doing this for the 30th anniversary show at Hero Complex Gallery. So what I did was I took that thumbnail and I did a little bit bigger, a little bit more kind of refined, not too much more refined sketch of kind of what I want the Zant and Ganondorf one to be. So you can see I've got the Triforce there, I've got some of these little broken pixely shapes from the game, and then I've got Ganon's face will be over here, so a big like profile view of his face. His hair will kind of bleed into the flowing aspect that it's going to go around the Triforce, and then Zant is going to be up here. I need to figure out a way to warp him a little bit more so that he goes with this like circular flow. And then I'm going to have like a couple of those little creepy shadow creatures over here. So, well, gonna get going on this, and the rest of this video will probably be a time lapse. So, hope you enjoy. Okay, so after I got the initial thumbnail down, I went to paper and did kind of a larger, more refined thumbnail. It's still not super refined in terms of I wouldn't use this to go to final art, but just to get a better idea of what I'm going to go from based on my really rough thumbnail I showed you guys a minute ago. So right here I've drawn like a circle, since I'm gonna keep like the main flow in a circular shape around each of the Triforces. And then I'm drawing in like the shadow creature, and then like Zant and Ganondorf very roughly. Later on I end up completely changing the design of this side, but this was a good jumping off point to start. Then from this point, what I'm going to do is take this drawing, scan it in, or sometimes I'll just use my phone and take a photo of it and then send it to myself, and I'm pretty sure that's what I did with this one, just because I don't need the high fidelity of like a scan. So I was able just to photograph it with my iPhone, email it to myself, and then take it into Photoshop, and then I just kind of use it as a base to draw on top of when I start my the digital sketch, and this will be the much more refined sketch. So got it in there, and then I ended up resizing it to be a lot larger because I wanted the illustration to be I really wanted it to be a big horizontal image. I really enjoy doing horizontal pieces lately. So yeah, at this point you can see me, I'm going in and starting to do the actual digital sketch on top of the pencil sketch. So I've just got another layer open on top of the photograph, and I'm just drawing on top of that. And at this point in the game I don't have all of my reference collected. At least not entirely. I ended up getting a lot more reference than I started with, and I had created a PDF of like, I think 4 pages with just probably 18 to 20 images per page before even getting to this point. So as you can see, I had looked up some more in-depth reference on Zant because I wasn't sure, depending on what angle I was looking at him, like what he looked like. So make sure you always have reference when you're doing stuff like this. Even if you like have a stylized or kind of a different, like you're not doing a style that's completely realistic, it's always good to still have reference and use that as a jumping off point, because it might help you stylize things a little bit better, make them feel a little bit more believable, or just show you what the character actually looks like rather than you trying to make it up. So I ended up with this illustration since I wanted to keep this flowing aspect around all of the Triforces. You guys just saw me use the liquify tool, and that was really useful for me to, like, if I didn't quite draw something exactly as flowy or like circular as I wanted, I could use the liquify tool and kind of push it a little bit more. And then from there I could draw back on top of it and refine it. So I've almost got Zant pretty much figured out, or the Zant Ganondorf side pretty much figured out. And make sure you save. It's always something that like trips me up sometimes. I've had some instances where I have screwed up and either rewritten over things or my computer's crashed. So make sure you save quite often when you're doing work like this. Yeah. So you can see here's just a different shot of me working on it. And then I'm going back into the computer, and this is, I've decided to add on a lot to it. So like I said, I wanted to make it horizontal. So I've expanded the canvas, and then I just used what I had already built with the Zant Ganondorf Triforce and copied it 2 other times just to kind of use as a fill-in for now. I obviously am going to go back in and redraw like Link and the shadow, or not the shadow, the light spirits, as well as Zelda and Midna and Wolf Link. So right now it's just kind of to get an idea of like, okay, this is where this goes, this is where this goes. So yeah, now I'm just working out the drawing side, or the drawing part of the Zant Ganondorf side. And this will go on for quite a while because I want to get each part to like an equally refined kind of state before I move on to the next stage of really refining and finalizing the drawing. So this would be, if you're going along step by step, we had the thumbnail drawing section, a slightly more revised sketch, and then a step further you could go, another refined sketch, and then after that the final line drawing. So this would be my like refined sketch with reference. So yeah. Okay, so at this point I've already gotten Zant down pretty well, and now I've moved on to defining Ganondorf a little bit better. So I went back, found a few more additional references than what I had from screenshots from the game, just because since the GameCube and we weren't in high definition, it's a little bit hard sometimes when you're using screenshots from somebody's walkthrough as reference. You don't get all the detail, so I wanted to go back and find like maybe some concept art. That's always a good thing to look for when you're trying to find reference for if it's something that's pre-existing, established, like a video game or a movie. A lot of times it's really useful to look up the concept art that was created for it, just because it gives you an idea, a much better idea of like what the character looks like and kind of how like their hair looks, what like clothing they wear, etc., etc. So right now I'm just defining Ganondorf a lot better, and yeah, so from here it's pretty self-explanatory what I do for a while, so I'll let you guys just kind of watch that. And at this stage, sometimes I like to work in a little bit of color just early on. I never completely finalize the color at the beginning. It's always kind of a working progress thing, almost as if I'm doing a sketch with colors as well as doing a sketch with the actual illustration. So I usually start off and the colors will be completely different by the end of the illustration because I go through and I adjust them so many times. A lot of times because either values don't work, and like a lot of times I'll change the mode to grayscale just to see how my values are. You always want to make sure your values are there. You want to make sure you have lights and darks and midtones, and you want to make sure that none of them are too close or too similar. You'll see later on in this, I adjust it, and two of the tones were a little bit too close, so I had to change them, adjust them just so that like the value was right. The colors, when it was in RGB, looked correct, and they had enough contrast, but in terms of value, it was not enough, so I had to go back and readjust it. Right now, I'm looking up stuff for Wolf Link, so I started off just looking up wolves, and then I remembered that Twilight was a thing, and I started looking up um, the wolves from Twilight, just because, like, or the werewolves or whatever the hell they're called from Twilight, and use those because, like, they're huge wolves. So it was something that lent itself well to looking intimidating and just had this imposing kind of look and feel to it. So started off um, drawing the wolf, and then realized I needed to kind of expand the canvas a little bit more. So I think I've expanded it to its more or less final size at this point, which at this point I think it's 48 inches by 20 inches. The final size will eventually come down to, I think it was 46 by 20, and then it has a border that makes it 24 by 48, just so that if anybody wants to, they can frame it easier than 48 by 20 or 46 by 20. Like, that's a little bit difficult to frame. So yeah, I'm just filling in Wolf Link around the middle Triforce. You can see I've kind of put in a little bit of like Midna's mask down there at the bottom, but for the most part I haven't really refined too much except for the Zant Ganondorf side and Wolf Link. Again, I'm using the liquefy tool here and there just to kind of further distort or curve Wolf Link to make him kind of go into the flow, the initial flow I had created in the thumbnail, where each Triforce and each little circular shape kind of intermingled with each other and had some flowing parts and pieces that went from one to the next and kind of kept them all connected, because in the game that's a very big thing, is that the light world and the dark world are very connected and mirror each other almost. So I wanted to kind of play off that in the design language as well as the colors, because from the start I had planned on doing one side mostly dark tones with middle tones as the majority, and then the other side as mostly the lighter tones and the mid tones as the majority, just to kind of, well, balance each other. So that was kind of the main jumping off point in terms of color. Now I'm going into looking up reference for Ganon, Ganondorf's like beast version or mode or whatever you want to call him. So he kind of looks like this, kind of like a boar, and so I wanted to keep it all pretty grounded in realistic references. So similar to how I did with Wolf Link and using real wolves, or at least things that looked like real wolves in reference to the Twilight stuff, I looked up different pictures of boars and kind of how their tusks work and how their nose is shaped, so I could use those as references for Ganon. Another great reference I ended up finding was from Princess Mononoke, the Miyazaki film. There's this boar, like forest spirit, and in that movie they do a great job at stylizing the boar and just making it look really creepy and kind of gross. So I wanted to use that as a little bit of a reference as well. So just blocking in, still pretty rough Ganon, and kind of figuring out like where I want shadows and things like that, using the liquefy tool again to kind of smear things around and distort them more. Now right here you'll see I've created a brush, and this brush is to create the like pixely patterns of the shadow world. And so I've used this brush, and it's called a scatter brush. So you'll go into your brush settings and you'll notice there's a scatter setting, and if you play around with the different settings in there, you can create a brush that will randomly create the shape that you've designated for the brush. So in this case I've done a rectangle, and then I rotated it on its side, or put it diagonally, and then so whenever I go to paint with that brush, the brush just randomly scatters the rectangular shapes everywhere. So that's what I was able to do to create that kind of pixely feel of the shadow world. And now I'm refining Link. Good thing to do when you're doing stuff like video games and things like that is there's always people who cosplay as the characters. And so I used a lot of reference of different cosplayers that I had found and kind of stylized them a lot more than the actual photos. So this piece is a little bit different from my normal work because a lot of times I do portraits and more realistic things. In this case, I was stylizing everything, so I was using 2 or 3 different cosplay photos to create like Link and to create Zelda and yeah, and Midna as well, just to kind of give them a little bit more realistic feel to go along with the wolf and the boar that I used for Ganon and Wolf Link. So now I'm just trying to figure out getting the shield and sword in there. At first I wanted to put the sword in, I eventually took it out and only to bring it back in later in a different way. It just didn't create the kind of look and the kind of shape I wanted, and it wasn't dynamic enough. And I know I had picked a pretty bland stance for Link, but it's kind of hard to put him in an action pose with this kind of layout. So I'd started with this, and then eventually I was able to, you'll see later how I was able to kind of make his stance a little bit more, have a little bit more motion to it and a little bit more energy to it. I think that's actually going to be in part 2 of this video, just because I had edited it all together and it came out to be like 5 hours, so I had to split this video up into 2 parts. So you'll see that in part 2 when I add Link's sword in there and make his pose a little bit more dynamic. At this point though, you'll see I've started to bring in some white, and so I've just to kind of map in like highlights and just trying to figure out the color a little bit more. You can see I'm not really trying to fill in everything completely. The white is still very sketchy, but it's enough to give me an idea of how things are going and where I want to move things or what I need to adjust. I've also put in around Link, you can see one of the light spirits. It's the snake one towards the end. For me, that light spirit really stuck out because it was really the only one that actually did anything to try and help Link. At the end, Zant like reveals himself to Link when you're by, like when you just like help that light spirit, and so he like reveals himself and you turn around and he's there, and then the snake like tries to like defend you but gets beat by Zant basically. So hope that wasn't any spoiler, but yeah. So then I've also worked in some of these little portals that they have in the games where the shadow creatures drop out from when you're in the shadow world. You can see that to the left of Wolf Link, and now I'm just going back in and refining Ganondorf and Zant a little bit more, and just kind of working things out just because I wasn't 100% happy with how Ganon looked at that point, and I had to work in the shadow creatures, and I realized having the shadow creature in the bottom left like going down in the composition it didn't quite work. I felt like the shadow creature should be facing more towards Link and Wolf Link rather than actively going away from them. So at this point I'd moved the shadow creature, and you can see I'm just blocking him in pretty quickly, pretty roughly, and he's kind of coming out from behind Ganondorf's head. So, and yeah, it's still very, like I said, still very loose compared to what it will eventually look like. It's just since this illustration is such a big thing and a lot different than what I normally do, it probably took a lot longer than most of my illustrations typically take, just because I typically work pretty quickly when it comes to sketching out the composition and the color, But with this one, since it's like this circular swirling design that kind of mimics a pattern and an illustration, it was a little bit different, and I think now if I went back and did this, it would be a lot more streamlined and the process would go a lot faster. So you can see now I'm seeing kind of what the design would look like with the shadow creature with the pixely like pattern work in the background, or the scattered pixels thing. And so I'm using the liquify tool again just to distort them even more and kind of really exaggerate that whole circular thing. And then just kind of after getting Link and the Ganondorf side kind of figured out a little bit better, I've brought back in the orange from before. And so I'm playing off of like orange and blue, but eventually the colors will change to be more of like a green and yellow orange. But this is still, like I said, in the early stages of like my color sketch. So now I'm trying to redefine Ganon, and I've gone back and kind of done a little bit more of a 3/4 view than a full-on side view for Ganon. You can see because it shows a little bit more of the nose, which is very iconic and kind of recognizable as some sort of like boar or pig. So I've gone in and done that, and then just kind of working in some of the details to make it look more like Ganondorf, giving it the red hair, and eventually I work in some of the head jewelry that Ganondorf has onto the boar, and then I've quickly drawn in Zant just to kind of give an idea of where he's at. His design is very intricate and has a lot of fine details, so I didn't want to go too in-depth at this point, so you'll see he ends up staying pretty loose and pretty undefined for a while. But I felt like his cone head type helmet was like just drawing the basic shape of that and leaving it kind of like that was enough for this phase of the drawing. Because, like I said, I'm still very much in the rough sketch phase or the reference sketch phase. I'm still not in the final line drawing yet. So, just kind of working in how Ganon's tusks and the flow from that goes into the flow of Link and Wolf Link. And then you can see I've started to rough in really roughly Faron, who's one of the light spirits. I go back in and completely change it, so because right now he's kind of in an awkward spot. Then I started working on the right side. You can see I blocked it in really quickly, but it was just kind of a rough idea of where one of the light spirits would go. And then I go back and I start to work on those light spirits. So you can see right now I'm looking at more references because what I had from the walkthrough when I did the screenshots of that walkthrough video, I just didn't have enough definition of like the snake spirit or any of the others really. So I'm going back in and kind of finding new references and trying to make them feel a little bit more realistic than their original design, just to make them fit with Ganon and Wolf Link. That's one thing I really enjoyed about this illustration, was being able to use more like realistic references and photos to create these really cool characters and creatures. So I think for the winged, or the more that like owl type spirit or light spirit, I ended up using barn owl. So there are some reference photos of different owls, and just using the wings and the face of that to create the light spirit was really useful, and I was really happy with the overall design and look of all the light spirits. I based Faron off of, I forget what kind of ape it was, but I used some different like monkeys and apes to stylize Faron. So at this point, I'm trying to focus more on the right side of the illustration just because it's been a little lacking so far. So you can see I'm roughing in like the feathers and the designs on the wings of the owl light spirit. And so you can see, um, yeah, how I'm using my reference. Like I said, I used barn owl for reference on this, so just making it a little bit more believable because in the game the spirit doesn't really have any sort of like feathers or texture to it other than it's just kind of white and gold and glowing. Uh, so I wanted to, like, again, probably said it so many times now, I wanted to bring it into a little bit more of a realistic world. So now you can see I'm going in and I've had blocked it in pretty roughly, and now I'm just refining my sketch a little bit more. It's still nowhere near final line drawing quality. I'm really, really, really picky about my line work and just making all my lines like basically perfect. It takes forever a lot of times, but I'm just that way. I'm like you can see right here, I'm going in and erasing and being a perfectionist, which sometimes can be good and sometimes can be very hindering for what you're trying to do. So yeah, so now I'm going in, just refining that sketch a little bit more. And I think it was at this stage in the sketch in the sketch that I started to refine areas a little bit more than I was, just because at this point I kind of figured out like what I was planning on doing. Even though I hadn't drawn it in yet, I knew kind of where I wanted the other characters I was planning on putting in to be. So I was able to, at this point, I wasn't trying to like prove to myself that the design and concept would work. It was more of, okay, I've got it figured out. Now I can start finalizing the drawing. Yeah, so now I'm working on Zelda and just kind of refining her a little bit more. And the reference I ended up using was, like I said before, I used some cosplay references, and I found one that had a really cool angle to it. It was kind of looking up at Zelda, and so her head was a little bit smaller than if it was like if you're looking straight on at her because it was foreshortened. But I really liked this idea of like it really felt like what she was holding in her hands was very important. So I wanted to have her holding up the arrows for her bow because they have a really cool design to them, and I wanted her to be holding those and basically have those be a centerpiece or kind of a focal point of the right side of the illustration, because I really don't have an overall focal point in this. I have a few things that kind of stand out in the final drawing or in the final piece, but for the most part I kind of want the viewer to look at this and constantly find new things that they didn't notice before, either little details or just like how intricate some of the line work is, or even characters that I've put in there, just because they don't all jump out to you in a certain order. So that was kind of another one of my goals going into this. So now you can see I'm working in some of the white into the right side of the illustration and just kind of blocking out the color a little bit more and expanding the color sketch. So at this point I'm still using kind of like that bluish teal color and orange. Surprise, surprise, teal, orange and teal, whole website for it. If you haven't seen it, check it out, it's actually kind of funny. But yeah, it's about how so many movies use orange and teal as color schemes, which can get really frustrating when you see like basically all of your favorite movies use that. So yeah, as I was talking about that, I changed the color a little bit more, and I went for more of like a reddish orange, almost like a pink and then changing the colors again. I'm getting it a little bit closer to the final colors that I ended up using, which I've gone kind of more of like a green, orange, and a cool like white color as the as more of like a final color palette. You can also see I brought in for the first time a gradient on this one, and this was probably the starting point for working gradients into this illustration. Normally I don't do a lot of gradients in what I do, but I just happened to experiment a little bit with the use of gradients and ended up really liking it. So yeah, so I'm still working out the general kind of colors because at this point I was planning on using gradients along with solid layers of color, just because the solid layers of color tend to be a little bit more of what I do with most of my work, so I didn't want to go full on gradients at this point. You'll see in the final, if you've already like taken a look at my website or seen this on Instagram, you'll see the final, and I didn't actually use barely any solid colors or solid layers of color. Most of the value and the different colors were created by overlapping gradients. All those gradients, though, were taken from these initial colors at this stage. So I had a layer that was a gradient layer that was that orange tone that went from orange to transparent. I had one that was that like dark purpley color or dark kind of cool color that I'm using for the line work, and using that as a gradient that went from that to transparent. And same with the light, the highlight tones of the cool blue highlight, and overlapping those, and then using clipping masks, I was able to get a lot of different tones and values. And you're going to see a majority of that in part 2 of this video, which I'll release next week. So for the next few seconds, you're going to see me still working at this stage of the illustration. Unfortunately, there is a gap in my recordings just because I was traveling, and my travel machine, I don't have a way to actually record reliably what I'm working on. When I travel, I use a Cintiq Companion, which is a great tool. I love it. It's been very, very useful these last couple of months because I've been doing a lot of unplanned traveling due to just different stuff going on back home, or other plans or vacations or things like that. So the Cintiq has been so useful, but it's a Windows 10 machine, and I don't quite know of a way to record Photoshop using Windows 10 yet. I tried using this app that comes with, it's like an Xbox, like, and what is it? An Xbox, some sort of app that lets you basically record your games, and it for some reason won't let me record Photoshop, even though I'd read different things online where you can actually use it to record other programs. It just doesn't play well or nicely with Photoshop, so I wasn't able to actually record anything with that. Plus, given the file size of this illustration, I don't think it could have handled working on this illustration and recording it, just because, like I said, I'm working at like 48 by 20 at this stage, 300 dpi. So I was really kind of putting the machine to the test on this one. But yeah, you'll see it's jumped a little bit ahead. It's not too far ahead, but now I'm working on the line drawing of another one of the light spirits, and it's the one with the antlers, and you can kind of see I've based its design off of like reindeer and just a regular deer. But reindeer, what's nice with them is they have really, really, really exaggerated and large antlers. So I wanted to kind of play off of that, and their faces are a little bit bulkier, and as opposed to a regular deer, which is a very narrow face, and I felt like the light spirit needed to have kind of a more imposing look and feel to it than being like having a very thin face and being very dainty. So yeah. And you can also see I've refined Zelda a little bit more in the span of working on the companion and then jumping back to my desktop. So you can see on Zelda I've kind of moved her up, made her larger. She's overlapping the owl spirit or light spirit a little bit more. You can see I've gone back in and really refined the feathers on the owl spirit a lot more as well. But I've mostly been working on the right side of this illustration at this point, so just trying to bring that up to same level as the other parts of the illustration. Like I said before though, I've already kind of started to really refine the line work at this stage, just because I know that like I've already, like I said, proved to myself that the concept is going to work. It's just a matter of refining everything at this point. So just kind of working everything up to a much more refined final line drawing state. And again, being a perfectionist with my line work. I have friends that joke that every single line that I do has to be perfect and has to be like have a perfect point to it. Otherwise, I end up hitting Command Z and redoing it. And in this video, they're definitely right. But yeah, so just kind of working in the overlapping of the spirit or the light spirits at this point. I keep wanting to say spirit animals, but light spirits. So I've kind of with this illustration, it's also kind of pushed me to play around more with the overlapping of different elements and having like one character overlap and also go behind like several other characters. And it's been interesting because it really helps, in my opinion, helps the piece weave in and out, and it kind of goes with the whole flow of the piece that I had initially started with in the thumbnail. So I was really happy with how that turned out. At this point, sometimes it's more useful for me to get rid of parts of the illustration. So you can see I've gotten rid of the centerpiece with like Link and Wolf Link, just because I'm trying to really finalize and refine the reindeer light spirit. And so I've also kept this on separate layers, so the middle was on one layer, the left side was on one layer, and Zelda and her side were on one layer. So I can go back in from each one and kind of refine them separately, and I don't have to worry about erasing big parts that I liked and then finding out, oh wait, this doesn't work, and having to go back and redo it. So I definitely recommend you working on separate layers, and later on in part 2 I actually take almost each character and give each character their own layer, just because towards the end of the line work I started to run into problems where refining one character would often hinder another character, or I would end up erasing parts of another character. And so I eventually, just to make it easier, had to put each character on their own separate layer to kind of refine separately. But I probably should have started that way from the beginning, but again, this piece is very different from what I normally do, and it's much more refined in terms of line work and the fidelity of the line work than most of my work, because a lot of my work is I'll either ink it traditionally and scan it in and just kind of plop it on top of the color layers, and it kind of holds the whole thing together and it doesn't have to be perfect. But with this one, since I was focusing on all the intricate like graphic language and pattern work in the game, I really wanted to make sure everything was crisp and clean. At this point, I've started to work in one of the flying shadow creatures, which I really love the design of them because they really don't have like a face. They have like a flat circular like face, I guess, or head. I know that I said they don't really have a face, but they just don't have like eyes or anything like that. And then they have these little like, for lack of a better word, nubs that kind of stick up around the circular part of the head, and they move, and I don't know, I just thought they were really cool little creatures and kind of creepy, so I wanted to put one of those in there. And then it just also gives me another part of the illustration that I can kind of hide in there that maybe you don't notice until you look at it for a while. Yeah, so I've got that, and I'm working on refining that down at the bottom of underneath Link and Midna and all of them. It also gives me a way to bring kind of a few of the darker tones into the lighter side, because I don't want this to be a very abrupt shift from the darks and the lights. I want it to kind of slowly change, so like as you get from the left to the center, it starts to maybe add in a few more highlights that weren't on the left side, and then as you get closer to the right side, it gets brighter and brighter, and like you lose more of the dark tones. Maybe those become scarcer and scarcer until eventually you don't have any dark tones on the right. So that was another reason I included the flying shadow creature. And then I'm working on Faron right now, who is the only light spirit that I actually know the name of. And he is kind of, I based him off of a monkey or a chimp, and in the game he just kind of like hugs a he hugs a like ball of light basically, and he's got this huge, like almost like a squirrel, like a huge tail that wraps around him and the ball of light. So I thought I decided to put him kind of like in the background behind Link and the snake, light spirit, and Wolf Link, because it creates a nice circular shape. And yeah, just another thing to kind of bring some lighter tones into the darker side, just like I used the flying shadow creature to do that on the light side. You can see I did, so you guys might have noticed I went ahead and drew in Zelda's arrows. I drew one first, and then through the magic of Photoshop, copied it twice, and just arranged them how I wanted to before erasing out like where they overlapped each other and things like that. I made sure to put those on a separate layer just because I didn't want to have them overlap Zelda, erase part of Zelda, and then decide, oh, I want to move them somewhere else, and then having to redraw parts of Zelda. So instead, I kept those on a separate layer, at least until I got further into the piece. At this stage, I'm just refining the owl spirit a little bit more, just kind of working on the feathers. Nothing super, super interesting. I moved the arrows again just to kind of show the owl's face, because that was being covered up before. I think at this point is when I finally decided that I wasn't going to really include the Triforces in the final piece. I decided that the only Triforce I was really going to put in there was going to be on Link's shield, and then I was going to probably try and highlight that with a pop color, or maybe have it next to like the darkest tone. So yeah, so at this point, like I said, you're basically just going to see me refine the line work on the right side a little bit more. You'll get to see the final line work in part 2 of this video, and then part 3 will be most of the coloring. Again, I wasn't able to record all of the coloring just because I was working on my Cintiq companion and wasn't able to record that. So I did take JPEGs though of my process every time I saved it, so I do have quite a few JPEGs that can show you the process while I was coloring it. You can see now I've moved over back to the flying shadow creature and just kind of putting in those little designs and things on its face or its head or whatever you want to call it, and then also putting in some of those patterns and designs on its like body and wings. So and then I'm going back in and working a little bit more on Ganondorf's side. At this point, I haven't really done much on his side since much earlier in the process, so I felt like I need to go back in and refine it just because it wasn't nearly as refined as the Link part in the middle and then Zelda's side. So just going back in and kind of refining Ganon, because I wasn't quite happy with his design yet. It just didn't feel like it was realistic enough for the other animals and the other spirits and things like that. So I wanted to go back in and really make sure that it was grounded in a little bit more of a realistic design than it was before. So you can see I'm just working in, drawing some teeth in there, things like that. Just gonna make him look really gnarly and really, really mean. So. And again, I think I said it before, but a little bit, I think in part two of this video, I kind of separate each character to their own layer. I probably should have done it a lot earlier, but like I said, working on something this intricate and this big was a lot different for me, so I kind of approached it how I normally go about it, which is kind of working on all the line work on one layer or breaking up like the line work into like 2 layers at most. And I probably should have done it this way just because it would have saved me probably a good amount of time. If I ever do something as intricate as this again, or as like complicated, I guess, for lack of a better word, I would definitely separate each character on their own layer just to save time and make it a lot easier to edit. Another thing you can use to edit your illustration a lot easier is to use layer masks. I use them a lot in this one. Right now I've only got like 5 going on, but towards the end when I start doing the colors, when I have all the gradient layers, I'm using layer masks to push and pull different areas, and I use the layer mask to create the like dark tones and highlights. And then what's great about a layer mask is you can always go back and erase the layer mask, and you don't actually erase what's on that layer. So it's not as final, which is really nice in case you like do something and then decide to change your mind. For the coloring stage of this illustration, it was very much a kind of figure it out as I go thing. So for me, if I was having to erase completely every single time, it probably wouldn't have worked out very well. So using the layer masks for the gradients for the color was very, very useful and saved me a lot of time and effort. So yeah, so this video just about wrapping up on part 1 of the video. Like I said, next week I'll have part 2 ready to go. It's just going to take me a while to record some audio. I apologize for it taking so long for me to put out another video, but as you can see, this project has been pretty labor intensive, and this is mostly what I've been working on the last couple of weeks. So I hope you enjoyed part 1, and I hope you come back for part 2 next week. So thanks for watching. Hey guys, thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. I know it was a long one. Stay tuned for part 2, which I will be releasing next week. I've already started editing it, so hopefully it won't take as long as part 1. Let me know if there's anything you would like to see in future videos, and please feel free to follow me on any of my social channels below. You can find links in the description to my Instagram, my Behance page, my Tumblr page, and my website. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can keep up to date on the progress on the Zelda illustration. Part 2 comes next week. Thanks, guys.